And it's just so amazing that, just giving our gut bacteria what they're looking for and cut our hunger. And the same thing, as I show in the book, you can go 3 days of getting prebiotic fiber into your diet and eliminating the sugars and saturated fats, and you'll completely change your gut microbiome from gang members to gut buddies just in 3 days. So,
that's amazing.
Which is great.
Welcome my guest, Dr. Stephen Gundry, MD. Dr. Gundry is one of the world's top cardiothoracic surgeons and a pioneer in nutrition, as well as a medical director of the International Heart and Lung Institute Center for Restorative Medicine. He has spent the last 2 decades studying the microbiome and now helps patients use diet and nutrition as a key form of treatment. He is the author of many New York Times best-selling books, including The Plant Paradox, The Plant Paradox Cookbook, and The Longevity Paradox, How to Die Young at the Ripe Old Age. And now his newest book, The Energy Paradox, What to Do When Your Get Up and Go Has Got Up and Gone. He is also the founder of Gundry MD, a line of wellness products and supplements. 20 years ago, Dr. Gundry decided to prevent health issues. He retired as a cardiologist to teach patients how to eat and guiding them how to get ahead of the problem, not fixing it after the fact. At his waitlist-only clinics in California, Dr. Gundry has successfully treated tens of thousands of patients suffering from autoimmune disorders, diabetes, leaky gut syndrome, heart disease, and much more, with a protocol that detoxes the cells, repairs the guts, and nourishes the body. Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Stephen Gundry. As I mentioned, I'm so happy to join you today and share this space with you. I know you are such a high in-demand educator and expert in the health and wellness space. I know a lot of people have probably read your books already, and
let's hope so.
They've read your books, listened to you on other podcasts, whatever it may be. But today, so some of your famous books are The Longevity Paradox and then The Plant Paradox. And now we're going to talk about your newest book, which is The Energy Paradox. And I, like I said, cannot wait to dig deeper in this, but I know there's going to be a wealth of knowledge shared on this episode today. So again, thank you for joining me. So let's see, where to begin, right? So I truly believe this book especially is coming at the right time, because I think so many people comment that they're lacking energy these days. They feel fatigued. They feel like they need the afternoon coffee. And so just to start off, why is there this energy crisis, if you want to say? Why are people lacking this physical energy?
Well, it's interesting. I've been, I guess, unwittingly in the energy business for 21 years now, since I started my restorative medicine practice. And actually over half the people that I see carry a diagnosis code of fatigue and malaise. That's a fancy way of saying, hey, I'm tired. But it's getting worse rather than better. In fact, in the good old days, I'd see people maybe in their 50s and 60s and upwards who, complain of being tired or complain of having brain fog. But now it actually is going down into the millennials, into 20-year-olds who find that, like I say in the book, their get up and go is got up and gone. And that's not normal at all. You mentioned off camera the 91-year-old neighbor who's, works 7 days a week. And I'm now in my 70s and I work 7 days a week. And you're not supposed to lack energy, but that's what's happening. So why is that? Well, number one, we now have a real crisis in leaky gut as one of the biggest causes of having low energy. And if you'd asked me 15 years ago what I thought about leaky gut, I probably would have told you it was pseudoscience. But now thanks to the work of Dr. Fasano from Harvard and my clinic's work, we know that if you have a disease process, period, it's caused by leaky gut. If you have an autoimmune disease, it's caused by leaky gut. If you have diabetes, it's caused by leaky gut. If you're tired, it's caused by leaky gut. If you have brain fog, it's caused by leaky gut. And this actually isn't news because 2,500 years ago, Hippocrates, the father of medicine, said that all disease begins in the gut. And you go, wow, he didn't have all the fancy tests I've got. How did he know this? But what happens is, the easiest way to explain this is we normally have a wall between everything we swallow and all the microbiome, all the bacteria that live in our gut, and us. And that wall is only 1 cell thick. And it's the same surface area as a tennis court. And everybody look down, there's a tennis court inside of you. And it's like, wait a minute, where's the tennis court? But what happens is that food we eat, our microbiome getting clobbered by what we can talk about in a minute, we get tiny little holes in this space. And food, lectins, one of my favorite subjects, and bacteria actually get through the wall of our gut. And on the other side of our wall is 80% of all of our immune cells, our immune system, our white blood cells. And they're there to actually defend against these guys coming across. And they defend by actually creating inflammation. And most people now have heard of inflammation. Most people think we ought to eat anti-inflammatory foods. But the problem is inflammation requires huge amounts of energy to do this ongoing battle. And that energy would normally be available to our muscles. It would be available to our brain. But our white blood cells are actually sucking most of that energy for themselves to fight this battle. In fact, in the book, there's this wonderful study that I think tells the story that's understandable. And I actually had these researchers on my podcast, the Dr. Gundry Podcast, a few weeks ago. So they're researchers from Duke, and they wanted to study one of the last hunter-gatherer populations in the world from Tanzania, the Hadzas. And the Hadzas are really fit, they're skinny, they're healthy. The men walk 8 to 10 miles every day. The women go 3 to 5 miles gathering tubers and berries. And obviously they, use a lot of energy. And so they said, gee, I think we'll compare these guys to office workers, desk workers. And you watch. The office workers, they're not going to use any energy at all, and that's why they're so fat. And what they found startled them, because the energy use by the Hadzas was exactly the same as the energy use of the people sitting at their desk all day. And it was like, how could that be? Well, these guys said, well, that just proves that any human being uses the exact same amount of energy no matter what you do. Well, that doesn't pass the sniff test. And what's happening is all these office workers, most of their energy production was going to inflammation, to the fire of inflammation. So they were using up all their energy. Instead of walking 10 miles like a Hadza, they were actually using it all internally, creating inflammation. And it's no wonder that we're exhausted all the time.
Wow, that is just so incredible. I mean, it's so hard to fathom that that's possibly what's going on in so many of us today. So the first thing you mentioned was the leaky gut. And I've had somebody that's a gut expert come on my podcast as well to talk about specifically leaky gut he was focused on. How does that even happen? I mean, I guess you could say, how does it happen and how do we avoid it? Because now we need to heal. So of course, in your book, I know you go into depth about the disruptors and what causes this, but can you explain, really what it's stemming from or what should we address?
Sure. In all my books, I talk about that normally we have a really good defense system in our gut, a multiple layer defense system, among which is a really healthy, robust, diverse microbiome, these hundreds of trillions of bacteria. And these bacteria actually eat a lot of the troublemaking plant proteins that I write about called lectins. And lectins are sticky proteins that plants use as their defense system against being eaten. Believe it or not, plants have a life. They were here first. They really enjoy not being eaten, surprisingly, and they don't want their babies eaten, their seeds. But they can't run or hide or fight, but they're chemists of incredible ability. And they actually make proteins called lectins that Dr. Fasano, among others, proved are one of the main ways that they break through the gut barrier. Now, normally, like I say, we have a defense system against these, but our defenses have been destroyed. It's almost like, to use a football analogy, we've lost our first string lineman, our second string lineman, our third string lineman, and now we've asked a guy from the stands to come down and be the offensive lineman in the Super Bowl. And that doesn't work very well. And that's literally what's happened to us, is that we've killed off most of our microbiome because we take antibiotics, broad spectrum antibiotics, which none of us knew back when they came out in the 1970s that, yeah, they might kill the bacteria that we thought was causing a problem, but they also kill off this entire tropical rainforest of gut buddies living in our gut. It's literally, when you swallow an antibiotic, it's like throwing napalm on this tropical rainforest. And if we have a forest fire, we could plant new little seedlings, but it would take 20 or 30 years to get a diverse forest back in shape. And yet we think, oh, well, I'll take antibiotics and I'll take some probiotics and everything will be fine in a couple of days. In fact, evidence shows that it can take up to 2 years to get your microbiome back to normal after a single round of antibiotics.
After a single round. That's incredible and so sad. Well, so antibiotics, some people, of course, need it if you have a bacterial infection. So how do we, if we are prescribed it because we need it, what should we do then?
Okay, so most of the prescriptions for antibiotics are actually given for people who are complaining of sore throats or sniffles, and they're caused by viruses. And antibiotics have no effect on viruses. So the vast majority of antibiotics are overprescribed for things they're not going to treat. That's number one.
True.
Number two, our biggest exposure to antibiotics is not what our doctor prescribes to us, but have been fed to animals that we eat to, believe it or not, make them grow fatter and faster. And this was discovered actually back in the 1970s, that if you gave animals low-dose antibiotics, they'd actually get fat. Interestingly, if we take antibiotics, we get fat too. So it's supposed to be, for instance, illegal to feed chickens antibiotics, but there's loopholes in laws. Let me give you a wild loophole. If a vet thinks that one chicken in a flock of 100,000 chickens in a warehouse, and believe it or not, people keep free-range chickens, 100,000 in a warehouse, and still call them free-range. If he thinks there's one sick chicken, he's allowed to give antibiotics to the entire flock because he thinks there's one sick chicken. Now you go, well, how could that be? Well, because the veterinarian is paid by the big agriculture company. He's an employee, and his job is, believe it or not, to get 100,000 chickens to slaughter. And he's allowed to do that legally, but not ethically.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
And those antibiotics are in the chickens and the beef and the pork that we eat. And so we consume them that way.
So definitely number one, of course, if you have a virus, you don't need an antibiotic. That's number one. And then also, of course, if you feel that, would you say that if, let's say you have a bacterial infection, and do you feel that we could avoid an antibiotic and just have our immune system fight it on its own, and then us be able to actually work off this bacterial infection?
Well, that's a great question. In general, our immune system is extremely good if we give them the tools that they want to handle the vast majority of viral and bacterial infections. In fact, one of the sad things is sugar consumption in any form actually depletes our immune system's ability to actually eat bacteria, to destroy bacteria. In fact, a single glass of orange juice will paralyze your immune system for 6 hours and stop your immune system from being able to eat bacteria. A single glass of orange juice.
Unbelievable.
And, when we're feeling sick, what do? Oh, well, let's have a glass of orange juice. They can get the vitamin C in us.
Wow. Oh my goodness. It's so twisted. That's why I'm so happy you're on this podcast right now, because there's so much that the world needs to know. And this needs to be brought to attention of so many people, especially with all these health crises. And I mean, you mentioned inflammation, and inflammation seems like everybody has inflammation of some sort, and then autoimmune disorders. And so the other thing you mentioned, the second thing, is the animals being fed, antibiotics, that there's a loophole. So assuming that means always when you eat meat, grass-fed, no matter what, organic.
Grass-fed and grass-finished. And that's a
Grass-finished.
very important point. So there is no criteria to decide what is a grass-fed beef. And here's the loophole. All cows eat grass for at least one day of their life. And legally, because of that, you can take a cow off of the pasture at any time in its life, take it to the stockyards, to the feeding lots, and feed it the rest of its life corn and soybeans, even if they're organic corn and soybeans, and you can still label it grass-fed. So it's wonderful loopholes. So you've got to look for grass-fed, grass-finished. Give you an example. At our local Whole Foods, there's 3 ground beef. 2 of them are grass-fed. The third of them is grass-fed, grass-finished. Now, the grass-fed, grass-finished is actually a lot more expensive than the grass-fed. And that's because it takes a long time to grow a cow if it's just eating grass. But it doesn't take long at all to give them corn and soybeans and grow them fast. So it's cheaper. But they can still label them grass-fed.
Oh, wow. So we have to be uber aware what we are buying and how it's labeled, and just look in the fine lines of what we're buying.
And one of my favorite sayings is, most of us know we are what we eat, but we are what the thing we're eating ate. And so there are so many examples of mischief, like the third real energy disruptor that's now rampant is glyphosate, the active ingredient of Roundup. Now, many people have heard of Roundup, where you see commercials to spray your driveway weeds with it. But Roundup got started, of course, with GMOs, with genetically modified organisms, soybeans that would be resistant to Roundup. And Roundup was actually patented as an antibiotic, and it wasn't a weed killer. And so now, unfortunately, Roundup is used on almost all wheat, almost all corn, almost all oats, almost all soybeans, almost all canola oil, as what's called a desiccant. A desiccant means I'm going to kill this plant, the plant will dry up, and then it's going to be a lot easier to harvest because it's dry and it weighs less. So unbeknownst to any of us who go looking for non-GMO, Conventional grains and beans are sprayed with Roundup as a desiccant. Now, two things happen. Number one, nobody washes the Roundup off of any of this stuff. They're ground up into our grains, they're ground up into our cereals. They're also fed to our animals. And so the glyphosate, which in and of itself is an antibiotic and in and of itself causes leaky gut, is in almost everything we eat. It's in our energy bars. It's in our Cheerios. It's in our, our granola. And it's actually a huge part of the problem now.
Oh my gosh. There's so much.
Yeah, I mean, even most California wines have glyphosate in them.
Oh my goodness. How do we distinguish if it has that in it or
So great question. So first of all, no matter what you're buying, please buy organic. Also look for either organic or biodynamic wines. Most wines in France and Italy and in Europe in general are not sprayed with glyphosate. There's a number of producers here in the United States that now, are specializing in organic and biodynamic wines. And read the label, look for these words, and then you'll know there's no glyphosate in them, the Roundup.
That's perfect. And of course, like you mentioned, one of your favorite topics is lectins. So what I know you provide this in the book, so you don't have to go into depth, but I want people to know, why are lectins so harmful to our gut, especially providing us with this leaky gut?
Well, interestingly, most people are aware of a lectin that they didn't know was a lectin, and that is gluten. Gluten happens to be a lectin, and that's one of the reasons it's so mischievous. And gluten's everywhere. And so lectins literally are sticky protein that the plants use to protect themselves by sticking to proteins that sugar molecules that line our gut, that line our blood vessels, that's how I got interested in them, line our joint surfaces, and actually line the spaces between nerves where one nerve talks to the other. And they even line our myelin sheath. And I can't tell you the number of women in particular who I see for MS, who their organic sourdough bread is one of their biggest culprits in perpetuating their MS. And strange as it may seem. So gluten happens to be a lectin. The lectins are also in almost all other grains. They're in oats, they're in corn, they're in quinoa, sorry about that. They're in buckwheat, they're in beans. For instance, the 7% of the proteins in most beans are lectins, including lentils. 7% of the proteins in lentils are lectins. That's a lot of lectins. And the good news for people who like beans is that a pressure cooker will destroy the lectins in beans and lentils. And I even have a book, my last book was the Plant Paradox Family Cookbook with all pressure cooked meals.
Amazing.
And the good news is you don't even have to have a pressure cooker anymore. There's several companies that now pressure cook their beans. I have no relationship with them. Eden is one of them, and the newest one is Jovial. And that one's easy to remember because it sounds like a happy person, and it's spelled the same way.
That's great. Oh my goodness. Well, so the other thing so we know some of the disruptors, the main disruptors, and I know that you'll probably talk more about those disruptors in the book to learn more about them.
Yep.
But talking about energy. So if we have our immune system, our gut, which 80% of our immune system lays in our gut, what are some things we could do to help restore what damage has already been done?
Great question. So one of the things we want to do is the more I can get people to avoid lectin-containing foods or know how to defuse them, like with the pressure cooker, the better off we are. The second thing that's really important in the book is we're now learning that the gut microbiome, our gut buddies, make incredibly important compounds that nobody knew about until a few years ago, which are called postbiotics. And postbiotics actually make our energy producing organelles, mitochondria, rev up energy. So what the heck, postbiotics? Let me catch your listeners up. So everybody knows, hopefully, about probiotics. So those are friendly bacteria. And a lot of people are now beginning to hear about prebiotics or prebiotic fiber. So this is the food that probiotics need to eat. I make the joke in my office in Palm Springs, I could sell people grass seed. And people in the middle of the desert, and people would come back a month later and say, you sold me bad grass seed, it didn't grow. And I go, well, did you water the grass seed? Well, no, you didn't tell me to. Well, did you fertilize the grass seed? Well, no, you didn't tell me to. And I go, well, what do you expect? Well, it's the same way. We swallow probiotics, good bacteria, but we have to feed them the food that they want to eat. And so those are prebiotic fiber. And they're actually really easy to come by. For instance, ground up flax seeds are prebiotic fiber. Ground up psyllium seeds are prebiotic fiber. There's tons of prebiotic foods. For instance, jicama is a great source of prebiotic fiber. Asparagus right now is in season. Great source of prebiotic fiber. The chicory family of vegetables like Belgian endive, like radicchio, which people call that Italian red lettuce that you see in most stores now. These are all great sources of a prebiotic called inulin. Jerusalem artichokes. Artichokes are all great sources of prebiotic fiber. And the more you eat of this, the more your probiotics make postbiotics. And you go, postbiotics, what the heck is that? Well, I like to call them, believe it or not, bug farts. So
I love the wording you give to things, our buddies and our parts.
Buddies and our parts. So these are actually what are called short chain fatty acids and a new discovered language system between our gut buddies and our mitochondria that are gases that our bugs make. So for instance, hydrogen gas is one such. Hydrogen sulfide, the rotten egg smell, is another. Methane is another. And learning about what these gases do to our mitochondria and to our overall health actually won the Nobel Prize for Medicine a few years ago. And who would guess that giving our probiotics prebiotics that they wanted to eat would produce postbiotics that tell our mitochondria to make energy. And it's even more exciting than that. It actually tells our brain to be in a great mood. These actually reduce anxiety. And so much of our depression and anxiety, which has been rampant during COVID, is actually because we don't give our gut buddies the things they need to tell our brain everything's fine. It's wild.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those that don't know what mitochondria means, can you explain that a little bit?
Yep. So almost all of our cells have little organelles that you probably learned about in high school biology and hopefully forgot all about it, that actually generate our energy currency, which is called ATP, from either sugars or proteins or fats. And our mitochondria generate this ATP by actually, if you will, tossing components of these things down a long tube. And it's called the electron transport chain. And briefly, it's like passing hot potatoes that are really energized and kicking them into a higher energy level. And at the final process, you generate this energy currency called ATP. What's fascinating is without these guys, we'd all be dead. Number two, the amount of ATP the normal individual makes in a single day is 140 pounds of ATP. Now, you're going, well, wait a minute, Dr. Gundry, I don't even weigh 140 pounds. Where'd that 140 pounds go? And turns out we spend 140 pounds of ATP every day to as energy. It's how we spend our money. So mitochondria have a huge amount of workload to do this. And the book shows that our current lifestyles, the way we eat food, how long during the day we actually eat food and process food has literally, we both live in the LA area, it's rush hour, nearly 16 hours a day in our poor mitochondria, trying to process the food we eat into ATP. And we have overloaded the ability of our mitochondria to actually make energy for us. Just like anyone who lives in the LA area knows, we overload our freeways almost incessantly throughout the day.
Wow. Oh my goodness. I was going to ask you, oh, that's the other thing. When you ask somebody, I remember this question came up in a group thing I was at. And the question was, how do we get energy? And a lot of people answer food. Food is the source of energy. And it's funny because if you eat a big Thanksgiving meal, what are you completely exhausted afterwards? So it's funny when people answer that, because it's actually from our cells. That's what provides us the energy. The health of our cells provides us the health of our life. And so keeping these, am I correct?
Well, you bring up a great point. Is the reason we all, after Thanksgiving meal or even a fast food meal at lunch, just want to, collapse on the couch or take a nap on our desk or, get a triple espresso to get ourselves charged again, is exactly what's happening. That big meal is arriving for processing at your mitochondria. And your mitochondria go, wait, it's literally rush hour in your mitochondria, and your energy production, just like traffic, slows to a crawl. And that's why, yes, we have to have food to make energy, but our current practice of eating food and eating energy-rich foods, an energy bar, an energy smoothie, is actually counterproductive to our mitochondria's ability to produce energy. And the other thing we've done is normally our great-grandparents ate whole food. They ate foods whole. And it actually took our digestive system an incredibly long time to break these food components into glucose, into amino acids from protein, and into fatty acids from fat. Now our companies have pre-engineered, pre-digested all of our foods into snacks and ultra-processed foods so that we don't eat whole foods anymore. Yeah. We eat energy disrupting foods that whack right into our mitochondria, thanks to our companies. In fact, fun fact, the first pre-digested food that was ever advertised as a pre-digested food was Kellogg's Corn Flakes.
Wow.
And their whole advertising campaign is, congratulations, we have now figured out how to pre-digest your food. And that's one of the worst things that could possibly happen to us.
Wow. Because, just like anything, our body is meant to work on its own. Like it's such a brilliant machine, if you want to call it. It's meant to do things on its own, not to have like something substituting and helping it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're right.
Insane.
And the other problem that's happened, our grandparents, great-grandparents, didn't eat all day long every day. Dr. Sachin Panda from the Salk Institute in San Diego has shown through apps that the average American now eats 16 hours a day, from literally the second we wake up to the second we go to sleep. And what would normally happen if we were eating in a more reasonable time period, say 12 hours, let's just use an example, from 7 to 7 or 8 to 8, our mitochondria, who are just being overloaded trying to work so hard, would have 12 hours to relax, to take it easy, to repair themselves. But instead, we just constantly asking mitochondria to work and not giving them any time to repair themselves. So in the energy paradox, what I ask people to do is gradually, over a 6-week time period, go from eating 16 hours a day to slowly but surely go to an eating window of about 8 hours a day. And if I ask anybody listening to do that tomorrow, okay, tomorrow I don't want you to eat until 1 o'clock in the afternoon, most people go, oh, are you crazy? Forget it about it. I can't make it. I get a headache. I'll have no energy. So if I take your hand and we do it 1 hour a day, and we slowly but surely get to that eating window, and what people find and what research shows is not only do you not get hungry, which is a great idea, but you actually get more energy because your mitochondria actually now have time to repair themselves and don't have to work constantly throughout the day to produce energy. And they go, yeah, this is great. Thanks so much. And the evidence from humans and from mice and rats and rhesus monkeys is just overwhelming how good this system is for producing more energy.
It makes so much sense because, like you said, when it's going on overdrive, there's so much energy spent by just that alone. So it makes sense why you lose energy, because so much energy is spent. So intermittent fasting, yes, it's great because it's talked about a lot more these days. And a lot of people that have experienced it or started intermittent practice or fat, that they especially say, like, I wasn't even hungry, or I have more energy because they're not digesting all this food all day long. So it's actually, there's a lot of science coming out, a lot of people that are implementing that into their life. So now you just proven why that works. So that's great.
It's interesting. As far as I know, I was the first to write about time-restricted eating or intermittent fasting way back in 2006, long before any of this was talked about, the 5-2 diet or fasting in general. So I've been actually studying this for well over 20 years now.
Wow. I actually saw one of your reviews on the longevity paradox was Walter Longo, and I had somebody on the podcast that worked with Dr. Longo.
Longo, yeah.
Longo.
Walter Longo.
They provide their farm provides the nutritional plants, and they also have the olive oil that's from that region. So I learned a lot about Walter Longo's
the fasting mimicking diet.
Yeah. So, and of course, he talks a lot about the longer fasting and the benefits of that. So that's really intriguing, which everybody could check out. And so if we were to go to a food that will help us provide more energy for us, what should we go for? If there's a food that you recommend.
Well, so again, the foods, I'll tell you a funny story. There was the godfather of fitness was Jack LaLanne, and hopefully people still remember him. Jack actually had TV shows in the 1950s, and he was literally dressed in leotards, and he had a daily TV show, and women particularly would be watching him every day. And Jack was famous for pulling ocean liners through San Francisco harbor by his teeth. And I got to know him later in life because he was an advisor to our Arthritis Institute in Palm Springs. And Jack used to say that if it tastes good, spit it out. And my advisors say, please don't, say if it tastes good, spit it out. People will get the wrong idea. Well, what he was actually saying is you should be eating for your bacteria. And most of the food that you think really tastes good, like a brownie, doesn't do anything for your bacteria. And you've got to decide which are those foods that are going to feed them. And if you feed them, they will take care of you by giving you postbiotics that turbocharge your energy. Let me give you another great example of this in action. Nobody wants to be hungry, and now we have hangry, which is even worse. And we've been taught that we have to kind of keep eating to keep these hunger feelings at bay. Well, in fact, it's actually not where hunger comes from. We now know that there are good bacteria that I call gut buddies, and they really like to eat fibers, long chain starches, resistant starches. And then there's what I call the gang members. These are the bugs that thrive on simple sugars and saturated fats, the standard American diet. And it turns out that these guys communicate to our brain about what they want to eat. And the gang members actually signal us to find more sugar, find more saturated fats. And this has been proven in humans. It's been proven in mice. You can give mice feces from fat mice, and they're skinny and they'll turn fat. You can give a human being, a skinny human being, a fecal transplant from an obese human being, and the skinny person, despite running marathons, will become fat.
Wow.
So the cool thing is that if you give the gut buddies what they want to eat, they'll tell you not to be hungry. So they did a study in China recently where they had people go on a 14-day water fast, 2 weeks of not eating. But they gave them 100 calories of prebiotic fiber. Now remember, prebiotics we can't digest. It just feeds gut bugs. With just 100 calories of prebiotic fiber a day, these guys went 14 days with no hunger because the gut buddies were getting fed, and the gut buddies are going, hey, we got this. We're great. You don't have to go looking for anything else. Thanks so much. We got this. And it's just so amazing that, just giving our gut bacteria what they're looking for can cut our hunger. And the same thing, as I show in the book, you can go 3 days of getting prebiotic fiber into your diet and eliminating the sugars and saturated fats, and you'll completely change your gut microbiome from gang members to gut buddies just in 3 days. So
that's amazing.
Which is great.
That's amazing. And I saw in your book, you also have an energy program, like an eating program. We don't have to get into all that, but I'm just curious, what is your eating protocol to give you? I mean, you work 7 days a week, you look amazing, you have so much energy. So how do you eat?
Well, for the last 21 years, from January through June, during the week, I eat one meal a day. And I talk about this in the book. And so I don't eat breakfast, I don't eat lunch. I eat all my calories in a 2-hour window from 5 to 7 at night.
Wow.
Why? Because my wife and I both work, and that's when we're home. During the weekends, I drop down to 2 meals a day. And I've been doing this now for 21 years, so it obviously works. But you don't have to join me in that. The evidence is, if I can convince you to compress your eating window to about 6 to 8 hours a day, what does that look like? Starting break fast, breakfast is break fast, at about 10 o'clock in the morning, and finishing up at 6 o'clock at night. That'll give you an 8-hour eating window. And just do that during the week. Then on the weekends, you get to take the time off. In the book, you get the weekends off. Now, why do we do that? Number one, studies in humans who we ask to time restrict their eating. If we give them the weekends off, which is back in the good old days when we would socialize and do family events, it gave people motivation to say, oh, gee, 5 days during the work week, I can do this if you give me the weekend off. And it had the same effect as if we asked you to kind of push all the way through 7 days a week without changing. The other thing I do in this book, which is unique, is I mentioned that mitochondria are overloaded, and they're actually really good at using one type of macronutrient at a time to work on. They're really good at working at glucose. They're really good at working at protein, and they're really good at working at fat to produce energy. But they're terrible when you try to get all three of these things jammed in simultaneously. So the first meal of the day, I have people eat a mono meal, which is either mostly a carbohydrate meal, or mostly a protein meal, or mostly a fat meal. And what that does is it wakes the mitochondria up with just one thing they have to do. And we found that people do much better with the first meal of the day as a very simple macronutrient. And the fun thing is, for instance, you could have a bowl of millet cereal with low-fat almond milk on Monday, and then go to egg white omelet with Canadian bacon, which is pure protein, on Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, go to a sliced avocado with 2 egg yolks and poured olive oil on it on Wednesday. And then you can switch it up. So
that sounds amazing.
Yeah, you get the benefits of whatever you want to do, rather than going, oh, I have to eat low carb. Oh, I have to eat, high carb, no fat. That's not what your mitochondria are looking for.
Oh, that's so good to know. I love that. And I know you share it all in here. So that's great. And the other thing, going back to inflammation, you mentioned this anti-inflammatory diet that a lot of people think that's what you go to when you have this inflammation. I consume turmeric a lot, ginger, and all the things. I consume a lot of, if you want to say, superfoods. So that's one of my go-tos. But why were you saying the anti-inflammatory diet that most people tend to go to? Why is that not what we should follow?
So there's nothing wrong with anti-inflammatory foods, but when you have a forest fire going on from leaky gut, eating anti-inflammatory foods is like trying to douse that forest fire with a garden hose. And those of us who have been through these fires in Southern California know that that's not very effective. So I have nothing against turmeric and ginger, etc. But the idea, and I have tons of patients who have autoimmune diseases that still have autoimmune diseases despite doing all this. And it's because they're just not going to solve the problem of leaky gut. It's far more important for me to tell you what not to eat to seal your leaky gut than to tell you what anti-inflammatory foods to eat to be a garden hose. And
it's like getting to the root cause of the problem before you start. Right. Yeah. And that's so important. And that's why I think this is so important to talk about everything we're talking about, because I think so many things is just a bandage. It's not really getting to the whole cause, which is, like you said, all this brain fog, fatigue. It's coming from leaky gut. Who would have known? It's crazy.
Socrates, apparently.
And then I was going to ask, as far as supplements, is there anything you feel, we haven't touched on it yet, the importance of sunlight, which I know is another great thing for source of energy. But as far as supplements, is there something you are like, this is what you should take to help provide you with, if you want to say more energy, whatever. Yes.
Well, so one of our biggest problems is vitamin D is essential to actually help you repair your gut and to repair leaky gut. And most people don't know this. Vitamin D actually tells stem cells in the lining of your gut to grow and fill in the gaps. And interestingly, these stem cells just sit there and twiddle their thumbs unless they're pushed into action by vitamin D. So, to give you an example, with COVID, there are now 17 different studies showing that the higher your vitamin D level, the safer you are from COVID. And if you get COVID, it's going to be a mild illness. So most of my patients with autoimmune diseases, and about 80% of my practice is autoimmune disease now, they have low vitamin D levels. And one of literally the first things we do is give them a lot of vitamin D. Kind of bare minimum for anyone watching is 5,000 international units a day. Bare minimum. I literally have some people with autoimmune disease on 40,000 international units a day, and they don't have vitamin D toxicity. Now, nobody go out and take 40,000 units a day. I follow my patients very specifically. Although I have never seen vitamin D toxicity in my life, ever. And neither is Dr. Mark Hyman, my friend. So could it exist? Maybe, but we've just absolutely underestimated the power of vitamin D to help our leaky gut. So that's number one.
Great.
The number two thing that I think most people are really deficient in is long chain omega-3 fatty acids, things like EPA and DHA, the common components of fish oil. Now, all of my vegan patients, when I first see them, are profoundly low in omega-3s. And they're consuming huge amounts of flaxseed oil, which has a short chain omega-3 called alpha-linoleic acid. Unfortunately, we are not a fish, and we don't have the enzyme system to convert short chain omega-3 fats into long chain omega-3 fats. But luckily for vegans and my vegetarians, there's now algae-based EPA and DHA, so there's no excuse. The other great thing is the long chain omega-3 fats are really essential to actually powering up your mitochondria to actually energize how that electron transport chain works.
So you recommend everybody taking omega?
Yeah, so try to get 1,000 milligrams of DHA a day, and look on the back of the bottle. It'll tell you how much DHA is in there. And you can go to Trader Joe's or Costco, or you don't have to spend a lot of money. Most of the fish oil now is what's called molecularly distilled, so it doesn't have heavy metals in it. It doesn't have mercury, so you don't have to be afraid of it.
Great. And also, I think you didn't say this, but D3 is what we should look for.
Correct, vitamin D3. So it usually comes in international units, but if you're not into the international units, 125 micrograms is the same as 5,000 international units of D3.
That's so helpful. Amazing. And then in regards to sunlight, why is sunlight so important? That we're missing all of this quarantine per se?
Well, interestingly enough, we actually produce ATP in our skin from sunlight exposure. Strangely enough, we're actually like a plant in that respect. So we can actually, and that's probably why all of us actually seek out the sun. Now, we are a sun-seeking creature. Unfortunately, because of COVID, none of us are out. And here in Southern California, everybody's lathering sunscreen on. And sunscreen is actually one of the 7 energy deadly disruptors. Sunscreen is absolutely actively absorbed through your skin and disrupts mitochondrial function. That doesn't mean you can't wear sunscreen, but I tell people I want you to eat your sunscreen by various supplements and build up what's called a sun callus. Back in the days before sunscreen, people would expose themselves slowly to the sun, and they would literally build up a sun callus that I talk about in the book. Amazing. The other thing that's important is that the red and yellow of sunlight in the early morning and the late afternoon actually activates a whole lot of really wonderful mood receptors in our brain that improve our mood and actually activate not being hungry. On the other hand, most of us now are absorbed to the blue spectrum of sunlight in the forms of all of our gadgets, all of this stuff, our televisions, all of our lights, and it's blue light that actually activates us to be hungry and to not go to sleep. And if that would describe most of us is, hungry and insomniacs, that's the reason why. And the book actually details how to prevent this, including getting yourself a pair of blue blocking glasses. Which
are you wearing some right now?
Yeah, actually I have a pair on right now.
It's nice. I like them. They're great. Well, oh my gosh, this has been, I'm just like mind blown, because this is just such a wealth of information. And all of us, of course, need to hear these things because our gut, just everything about this. I mean, all of us feel, I know I used to always want a coffee in the middle of the day, but I believe partly it was that habit that I had of having it opposed to needing the energy. It was the thought, oh, I need more energy. So I think we need to change our processing around of what's providing us the energy and actually get to the root cause of what's giving or lacking that energy or absorbing the energy. So this has been so great. Obviously, there's so much more in your book. I cannot wait to dig into this. And I want everybody to grab a book now, The Energy Paradox. And thank you so much, Dr. Stephen Gundry. I mean, this has been phenomenal, and I'm just so appreciative for everything you shared today.
Well, thanks for having me on. And, follow me on drgundry.com. You'll find me on Instagram. I got 2 YouTube channels. And
amazing.
Get the book wherever you can find a book. And please help out your local booksellers. They have been devastated by COVID, and anything we can do to help them out will be great.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much again. I deeply appreciate your time and your energy you're giving us today.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.